welcome back. This week in AI, it feels like all the big headlines aren't really separate stories at all. They're all part of one single massive narrative. So today, we're going to connect the dots between thinking robots, these huge billion-dollar investments, the legal showdowns, and what it all means for us. Let's get right into it.
So, for as long as we've talked about AI, it's pretty much lived inside a box, right? Inside our computers, on servers. Well, that's all starting to change. AI is literally breaking out of the digital world and stepping into our physical one. And Google's new robots? Yeah, they're leading the charge.
So how in the world are they pulling this off? Well, it's this really clever two-step process. Think of it like a brain with two parts. First, you've got the planner. This is the part that thinks, that reasons. It uses Gemini, and get this, it can even Google things it doesn't know. Then you've got the doer. That's the part that takes the plan and makes it happen in the real world. So you could tell it, hey, pack my suitcase for a trip. And the planner is smart enough to check the weather forecast online, figures out what you need, and then the doer physically puts the right clothes in the bag. Incredible, right?
Okay, but before we all start planning our robot butler-filled futures, let's get a little reality check here. When it comes to the really tough stuff, like, say, sorting trash perfectly, the success rate is sitting between 20 and 40%. Now, don't get me wrong, that is a huge leap from where we were, a massive improvement, but it's also a good reminder that we're still very much on the journey here. We haven't quite reached the destination.
All right, so with that amazing new robot as our jumping-off point, here's the roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll dive into the incredible race to build this future. Then we'll look at the fight to write the rules. After that, we'll get into the human side of things, and finally, we'll try to figure out what happens next.
All right, Section 1, the race to build. Look, creating robots that can think, well, that takes a lot more than just clever code. It takes a truly massive amount of physical stuff and, of course, money.
And when I say massive, I mean, how does $252 billion sound? That's what corporations have poured into AI in 2024 alone. And we're not just talking about software licenses here. This is a colossal bet on physical things. Data centers, computer chips, and power grids on a scale we have just never seen before.
And whenever you see that much money flying around that fast, you have to ask the big question, right? Are we just watching history repeat itself? Is this just the dot-com bubble all over again?
The comparison to the 90s is, well, it's pretty striking. Back then, telecom companies went nuts, laying down way more fiber optic cable than anyone actually needed at the time. Today, we're seeing the exact same kind of gold rush to build AI infrastructure. You've got these giants, OpenAI, NVIDIA, Oracle, CoreWeave, and they're all tangled up in this crazy web of deals, all making the same huge gamble, that the customers, the revenue, will eventually show up to pay for it all.
But that is a huge gamble, because right now there's this pretty scary gap. You see the investment bar soaring. But then you look at the research from MIT, which found that something like 95% of corporate AI pilot projects, they're delivering little to no real value. Now, of course, the people building this stuff, like Sam Altman, they'll argue that this massive burn of energy and cash is totally necessary. It's the price you pay to compress decades of scientific progress into just a few years. The billion-dollar question, though, is whether the customer demand can catch up before that massive bill comes due.
So when you add this massive, super-fast build-out, it's going to create friction. It's bumping up against the real world everywhere. And that brings us perfectly to our second section, writing the rules. It really is like the modern Wild West out there. And the battles over what's legal and what's ethical, they're just getting started.
And this whole conflict is leading to some pretty wild headlines. I mean, think about this. Your cutting-edge AI answer engine gets sued by the dictionary. Yeah, for real. When that happens, you know you are in totally uncharted waters.
So here's the lowdown. On one side, you have publishers like Encyclopedia Britannica and Merriam-Webster. They're saying Perplexity is basically just scraping their copyrighted work to train its AI. And then that AI spits out answers that stop people from ever needing to visit their websites and see their ads. But Perplexity's defense is that its whole purpose is to give direct answers, not just links, and that they have programs for fair use. Honestly, however this case goes, it could set the precedent for the entire AI search business model for years to come. It's a big one.
And this battle for control, it's not just happening in the courtroom. It's going global. It's geopolitical. Governments everywhere are jumping in. In India, the High Court just gave the government more power to take down content. The U.S. is using sanctions to squeeze China's chip makers. The Pentagon is keeping companies like DJI on a blacklist. The point is, The rules for AI aren't just being written in code. They're being hammered out in trade policy and national security debates.
Okay, so we've got the machines, we've got the money, we've got the rules, but what about us? What about people? That brings us to our third section, the human equation, where we look at how all this high-level stuff is actually affecting real people's jobs and lives.
And this isn't some far-off hypothetical future we're talking about. It is happening right now. Just look at the Boston area. A health tech company, American Well, cut 35% of its staff, while also training the remaining employees on how to use AI. Over at DraftKings, if you want to hire someone new, you first have to prove that an AI agent can't do the job. The job market isn't just changing, it's being actively re-engineered as we speak. So what's the right way to handle this? As a society, we're kind of exploring two main paths. On one hand, you've got the worker-first movement. This is all about transparency, protections for employees, and giving them a real voice in how AI gets rolled out. And on the other hand, you have the skills-first plan. A great example is Walmart. They're not waiting around. They are actively upskilling their massive workforce to get them ready for new, often higher-paying jobs that this AI transition is creating.
But the impact here isn't just on our job descriptions. It's on our own behavior. There is this fascinating and honestly a little bit chilling study in the journal Nature. It found that when people handed off a reporting task to an AI that was programmed with a profit goal, well, those people became a lot more dishonest in their own reporting.
Which leads us to a really deep, really important question. When we delegate our tasks to AI, are we also, maybe without realizing it, delegating our ethics? As we hand over more and more of our work to these powerful systems, are we also handing over a piece of our own moral compass? That's something we really have to think about.
Okay, we've talked about the machines, the money, the rules, and the people. Let's pull this all together in our final section, what happens next? And there's a really critical warning here that I think we all need to hear.
And that warning comes from a pretty credible source, former Google CEO Eric Schmidt. And here's his big point. He says that while the US tech giants are laser-focused on pouring billions into these secret proprietary models, all in a race to build this hypothetical, human-like artificial general intelligence, or AGI, China is playing a different game. They're focused on open-source models and practical, everyday applications. You know, the exact kind of robotics we started this whole explainer with. And Schmidt's warning is simple, that real-world, application-focused strategy, that could be the one that actually wins in the long run.
And that leaves us with the single most important question of all. In this absolutely frantic, multi-billion-dollar race to build the future, are we actually building the right kind of AI? Are we focused on an AI that actually creates value in our daily lives? Or are we just chasing some abstract, far-off dream? That's the question that is going to define this entire next decade. Thanks for tuning in.